In a small town surrounded by quiet hills, there lived a boy named Ethan, a 10-year-old child with Down syndrome who had a smile brighter than the morning sun. He was new to the neighborhood and had just started going to a big public school. For Ethan, everything felt strange. The long hallways, the crowd of children, the sound of laughter echoing everywhere. It was exciting but also scary. He wanted to make friends, to be part of that laughter. But things didn't go the way he hoped. On his first day, Ethan walked into class holding his mother's hand tightly. His mother bent down and said softly, "You'll be fine, sweetheart, just be yourself." Ethan nodded, his small backpack bouncing as he walked to his seat. The room went quiet for a second as everyone turned to look at him. Some children smiled politely, but others exchanged looks and whispered. Ethan didn't understand what they were saying. He just smiled back, hoping they'd smile too. The teacher, Mrs. Parker, introduced him gently. "Class, this is Ethan. He's new here, so let's all be kind and help him feel welcome." But children can be cruel without meaning to be. During recess, when Ethan tried to join a group of boys playing soccer, they laughed and said, "You don't even know how to kick right." They didn't mean to be mean, but their laughter stung like cold rain. Ethan stood there, unsure what to do, until he quietly walked away and sat alone on a bench. He looked down at his shoes, wondering why being friendly felt so hard. Each day after that, he tried again. He'd wave at kids in the hallway, or offer to share his crayons. Sometimes they ignored him. Sometimes they giggled. One day, when he answered a question in class and his words came out a little slow, some children covered their mouths and whispered. Ethan didn't understand why they laughed. He was just trying his best. Mrs. Parker frowned and told them to stop, but the damage was already done. Ethan's mother would ask him every evening, "How was school today, honey?" And he would smile and say, "Good," even though inside it didn't feel good at all. He didn't want to worry her. He knew she worked hard and always told him, "You are special, Ethan. You can do anything if you try." So he tried. Every single day, even when no one noticed. Sometimes, Ethan would draw pictures of the kids laughing, but in his drawings, everyone was smiling with him, not at him. He kept those drawings in his notebook, dreaming that one day they might come true. He didn't hate the other kids, he just wished they could see that he wasn't so different after all. At lunch, Ethan always sat at the same corner of the cafeteria. Near the window, from there, he could see the playground. Sometimes a kind girl named Lily would sit with him. She didn't talk much, but she smiled and shared her cookies. Ethan liked that. She didn't ask him questions he couldn't answer easily. She just sat there as if saying, "You don't have to talk to be my friend." That small kindness made his heart warm. Even though most children didn't include him, Ethan never stopped trying. He helped the janitor pick up fallen books. He held doors open for teachers, and whenever someone dropped a pencil, he rushed to pick it up first. His heart was gentle, full of love. He didn't see the world as cruel. He saw it as full of people who just needed time to understand. But behind his gentle smile, there was sadness too. Every night after dinner, he would go to his room, sit by the window and look at the stars. His mother sometimes stood at the door, watching him silently. She knew her son was different, but not less. He was capable of feeling things deeply. She wished others could see what she saw. The kindness, the warmth, the beauty inside him. One day at school, there was a group project. Each group had to make a poster about their dreams. When it was Ethan's turn to share, he stood up nervously, holding a colorful drawing. "I want to make music," he said softly, "because music makes people happy." Some students snickered, whispering, "He can't even talk properly." The teacher quickly told them to be quiet, but Ethan's small voice was already trembling. Still, he finished his sentence. "I want everyone to smile." That moment passed quickly, but for Ethan it stayed in his heart. He went home that day feeling heavy. He sat by the piano his mother kept in the corner, an old wooden one with faded keys. He pressed one note, then another. The soft sound filled the room, and for the first time all day, he felt calm. He didn't know it yet, but this piano would become the bridge between his world and theirs. Every time he played, he forgot about the laughter, the whispers, and the loneliness. The music spoke for him in ways words never could. In school, Ethan was the boy everyone ignored. But in his own little world, he was something more. A dreamer, a musician, a heart that refused to give up. The world had judged him before knowing him, but one day, his hidden light would shine so bright, that even the ones who laughed would stop and listen. For now, though, he sat quietly at his piano, his small fingers pressing the keys softly, unaware that this simple love for sound would soon change everything. Ethan's world at home was very different from the one at school. At school he felt small and unseen, but at home he felt safe, loved, and free to be himself. His mother, Grace, was his biggest supporter. She always told him, "Ethan, the world may not understand you right away, but that's okay. You have something special inside you, and one day, they'll see it." Ethan didn't fully understand what she meant, but her words always made him smile. In their small house, there was an old piano that had been sitting in the corner of the living room for years. It used to belong to Ethan's grandmother. The wood was scratched and some of the keys stuck when pressed. But to Ethan, it looked magical. Whenever the sunlight touched the white keys, they sparkled like tiny stars. He often stared at it, wondering what kind of sound it could make. One rainy afternoon when thunder rumbled outside, Ethan was sitting alone while his mother cooked dinner. The sound of raindrops against the window made a soft rhythm. His eyes wandered toward the piano. Something inside him wanted to touch it. He walked slowly, his small fingers trembling a little. He pressed one key, just one. The sound was deep and beautiful. Echoing gently through the house, Ethan's eyes widened. He pressed another key, then another. Soon, a small smile appeared on his face. Grace peeked from the kitchen and saw him sitting there, his back straight, his eyes glowing. She didn't stop him. Instead, she watched quietly. She could see something was happening. A connection between the boy and the piano that words couldn't explain. Ethan began pressing random keys, laughing softly every time a sound came out. He didn't know what he was doing, but he loved how each note made him feel alive. From that day on, the piano became Ethan's favorite place. Every evening after dinner, while other kids watched cartoons, Ethan sat by the piano, tapping the keys and humming. He didn't know how to read music, but his heart somehow understood it. He could remember the sound of each note, and he made up little melodies on his own. They weren't perfect, but they were beautiful in their own way. Sometimes his mother would sit beside him. Listening, her eyes would fill with tears, not from sadness, but from pride. She realized that her son, who found it hard to express himself with words, had found a new language, the language of music. It was his way of speaking without saying a single word. One evening, Ethan told her softly, "When I play, Mom, I feel like I'm talking to the stars." Grace smiled and said, "Then keep talking, sweetheart. Maybe one day the stars will talk back." From that night, Ethan began to spend even more time practicing. He would wake up early, rush to the piano, and start playing before breakfast. The sound of his soft tunes filled the small house every morning, bringing warmth and peace, but not everyone understood his passion. When relatives visited, some of them whispered, "Why let him waste time with music? He should focus on simple things." Grace never argued. She just said, "Music makes him happy, and that's all that matters." She knew that piano wasn't just an instrument for Ethan. It was his safe world, a place where no one laughed, no one judged. Sometimes, Ethan would close his eyes while playing, imagining he was on a big stage, with shining lights and people listening quietly. He dreamed that they were all smiling, not because they felt sorry for him, but because they truly loved his music. That dream gave him courage, even though it lived only in his heart for now. There were times when Ethan struggled. His small fingers couldn't always reach all the keys, and sometimes he pressed the wrong notes. But instead of giving up, he would giggle and say, "Oops, that's a funny sound." His laughter filled the room, turning mistakes into music. His mother often said, "You play with your heart, Ethan, and that's more important than playing perfectly." Every night, before going to bed, he would touch the piano gently, like saying goodnight to a friend. The piano had become his secret companion. It never teased him, never turned away. It just waited patiently for him every day. The soft sound of its keys was like magic that healed his heart. One night, as the moonlight spilled into the room, Ethan played a tune so calm and gentle that even the wind outside seemed to listen. Grace recorded a short video on her phone, just to keep that memory. When she watched it later, she couldn't believe how natural he looked, as if he had been born to play. She thought about showing it to someone, but then she hesitated, not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted to protect his little world. Ethan, unaware of her thoughts, just smiled and said, "Mom, when I play, I don't feel sad anymore." Those simple words made her heart ache with both pride and pain. She realized how much he carried inside, all the hurt from school, all the laughter he pretended not to hear, and how the piano washed it all away. Outside, the world still didn't see the real Ethan, but inside their small home something beautiful was growing. Every note he played was a piece of his soul, and every melody was a message that said he was more than what people thought. Little did they know this quiet boy sitting by an old piano in a tiny house was slowly building a voice powerful enough to change hearts. His music was still a secret, but one day soon, it would echo far beyond those four walls, silencing every cruel whisper that had ever hurt him. And when that day came, the world would finally listen. Ethan's mother, Grace, had always known there was something special about the way her son touched the piano. It wasn't just about pressing keys, it was about the feeling behind each sound. Every evening after finishing his homework, Ethan would rush to the living room, climb onto the small wooden stool, and let his fingers wander across the keys. The moment his hands touched the piano, he entered a different world. It was a world where no one laughed at him, no one whispered behind his back, and no one called him different. It was a world made only of music and peace. Grace would often sit in the kitchen, pretending to clean or read, but really she was listening. The soft notes drifted through the house, like whispers of happiness. Sometimes the tunes were slow and sad, sometimes fast and cheerful. Ethan didn't play from any book. He played from his heart. The melodies came from deep inside him, shaped by his emotions, by the joy he felt when his mother smiled, or the pain he hid when the kids at school laughed at him. One evening, Grace took out her phone and decided to record him. She didn't plan anything. She just wanted to capture the magic she saw every night. Ethan was sitting at the piano, his head slightly tilted, his eyes half closed. He played a soft tune that sounded like falling rain mixed with sunshine. When he finished, he turned around shyly and asked, "Did you like it, Mom?" Grace smiled through tears. "It was beautiful, my love. Absolutely beautiful." Later that night, when Ethan was asleep, Grace watched the video again. The sound touched her heart so deeply that she couldn't keep it to herself. She thought of someone who might understand, Mr. Collins, the music teacher at Ethan's school. He was kind and patient, known for encouraging students who loved music. The next day, when she went to pick Ethan up, she found Mr. Collins in the hallway and said softly, "I want to show you something." She opened the video on her phone and pressed play. Mr. Collins listened quietly. At first, his face showed polite curiosity, but as the melody continued, his eyes widened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The boy he saw every day at school, quiet, shy, barely speaking, was playing music that carried emotion beyond words. When the video ended, he blinked and asked, "Grace, is that really Ethan?" She nodded proudly. "Yes, he's been playing at home for months. I think music helps him express what he can't say." Mr. Collins was speechless for a moment. He had seen many talented students before, but Ethan's music was different. It wasn't perfect, but it was pure. It came from a place of honesty and feeling. He said, "I'd like to hear him play in person." "If that's okay," Grace smiled and agreed. A few days later, Mr. Collins came to visit their home. Ethan was nervous at first. He wasn't used to having guests watch him play. He sat quietly on the stool, looking down at his hands. Mr. Collins knelt beside him and said gently, "Hey, Ethan, I heard you love music. Could you play something for me?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He pressed a few keys, then began to play one of his favorite melodies. As the room filled with sound, Mr. Collins felt a lump in his throat. The boy's fingers were small, yet they moved with care and grace. His eyes were full of focus and innocence. Each note seemed to tell a story of loneliness, of dreams, of hope. When Ethan finished, he looked up. Waiting nervously, Mr. Collins clapped softly. Not wanting to startle him, "Ethan, that was amazing," he said with genuine awe. "Do you know how special that is? You played from your heart, and that's something even trained musicians sometimes forget." Ethan smiled shyly. "I just play what I feel." That night after Mr. Collins left, he couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. He thought about all the times he had seen the boy sitting quietly in class. Ignored by others, he realized that behind that silence was a musician waiting to be heard. He decided then and there that he would help Ethan share his gift with the world. The next day at school, Mr. Collins told Grace that he wanted Ethan to perform in the upcoming school talent show. Grace's heart skipped a beat. She was proud but also scared. "Do you think he can handle it?" she asked softly. Mr. Collins nodded. "He's ready, and I'll be there to help him every step of the way." That evening, Grace told Ethan about the idea. At first, he froze. "Me? On stage?" His voice trembled. "But people will laugh." "They always laugh." His mother took his hand gently. "Maybe they will at first, but when you play, they'll stop. Because music makes people listen." Ethan looked at the piano. Unsure, the thought of performing in front of everyone frightened him. But deep down, a small spark of excitement began to grow. The piano had always been his secret world, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to share it. For the next few days, Mr. Collins gave him simple lessons, not to change his natural style, but to help him gain confidence. He showed Ethan how to sit straight, how to take a deep breath before playing, and how to feel proud of every note. Ethan practiced daily, sometimes making mistakes, sometimes stopping halfway, but always starting again. Grace watched him grow stronger, not just in music but in spirit. The boy who once came home quiet and sad now hummed as he played. His eyes sparkled again. The piano had not only become his voice but also his courage. What no one knew was that this quiet discovery, a mother's faith, a teacher's belief, and a boy's music, was about to change everything. The child the world had underestimated was now preparing to show them a miracle, a melody that would silence every cruel laugh and prove that true talent needs no words, only heart. The announcement came on a bright Monday morning. When the students gathered in the school assembly hall, the principal smiled and said, "Our annual school talent show will be held next month." The children clapped and cheered with excitement. Everyone started whispering about what they would do. Some planned to dance, some to sing, and others to show magic tricks. But when Ethan heard the news, he sat quietly in his seat. His heart began to beat faster. Later that day in music class, Mr. Collins looked at the students and said, "This is your chance to show the world what makes you special." Then he turned his eyes toward Ethan and smiled. "And some of you might surprise everyone." Ethan looked down. Pretending to be busy, he knew what Mr. Collins meant. But the thought of standing on a stage with all those people staring scared him. He could already imagine the laughter, the whispers, the cruel smiles. He didn't want that again after class. Mr. Collins called him over gently. "Ethan, have you thought about performing at the talent show?" Ethan's eyes widened. "Me?" he asked softly. "But people will laugh." Mr. Collins shook his head. "Not when they hear you play. Music has power, Ethan, when you play." "People listen with their hearts, not their eyes." Ethan didn't reply. He simply nodded and walked away quietly. At home that evening, Grace noticed something was on his mind. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked. Ethan hesitated before saying, "Mr. Collins wants me to play the piano at school." Grace's heart leapt with joy. "That's wonderful," she said. But Ethan's voice trembled. "What if they laugh again, Mom? What if they don't like it?" Grace walked over and knelt beside him. "Ethan, people may laugh because they don't understand, but when you play, they'll see your heart, not your differences." That night, he sat by the piano, but instead of playing, he just stared at the keys. His reflection in the shiny wood looked unsure. "Can I really do this?" he whispered to himself. Then, as his fingers brushed the keys, a soft melody began to form. Slow, emotional, and pure. Each note reminded him of his journey, of all the times he had been laughed at, and of how the piano had always been there to comfort him. The next day, Mr. Collins made an announcement in class. "Anyone who wants to join the talent show must register this week." Ethan looked around. Everyone seemed so confident. The boys behind him were talking about their comedy act. The girls were planning a dance performance. Ethan sat still, lost in thought. When Mr. Collins handed him the form, Ethan took it but didn't fill it out. He kept it in his pocket all day, feeling its paper crumple as he moved. It was like a small piece of courage he wasn't sure how to use. When he got home, he took the paper out and placed it on the piano. His mother came and sat beside him. "Still thinking about it?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "I want to do it, Mom, but I'm scared." Grace smiled gently. "Do you remember what I always tell you? Music speaks louder than words when you play. You're not just pressing keys, you're telling your story, and stories like yours deserve to be heard." The next morning, Ethan made his decision. He walked up to Mr. Collins after class and said quietly, I'll do it. Mr. Collins smiled warmly. That's the spirit, Ethan. I knew you would. From that moment, preparations began every afternoon after school. Ethan stayed behind to practice. Mr. Collins helped him polish his favorite tune, the same one that had moved him when he first heard it at Ethan's home. At first, Ethan made many mistakes. He'd forget where to place his hands or lose rhythm halfway through. Sometimes he would stop and look frustrated, but Mr. Collins always encouraged him. It's okay, Ethan, even the best musicians stumble. What matters is that you play with feeling. Slowly, Ethan began to gain confidence. Each day his fingers became steadier and the music grew stronger. Grace watched from the doorway during one of his practices. Her eyes filled with tears as she saw her son's small hands glide over the keys with passion. She couldn't believe how far he had come. Her little boy, who once hid behind her legs in fear, was now preparing to stand in front of hundreds of people and share his heart. One evening, after finishing his practice, Ethan turned to Mr. Collins and asked softly, "Do you really think they'll like it?" Mr. Collins smiled. "They'll do more than like it. Ethan, they'll feel it, and that's something very few people can do." Those words stayed in Ethan's heart. He began to dream of the day he would play, not with fear, but with hope. The week before the talent show, the whole school buzzed with excitement. Posters covered the walls. Students practiced in every corner of the building. Ethan still felt nervous, but there was something new inside him: determination. Every night he'd play the same song over and over, his fingers dancing across the keys until the sound became part of him. On the night before the big day, he couldn't sleep. He sat on his bed, staring at his neatly ironed clothes. His mother came in and brushed his hair gently. "You'll be wonderful," she whispered. "Just close your eyes when you play and remember you're not alone. The piano will be right there with you." Ethan nodded, then smiled a little. "Okay, Mom," he said. "I'll play for you, for Mr. Collins, and for everyone who ever laughed at me. I'll show them who I really am." And with that promise in his heart, he fell asleep with a calm smile, dreaming of a shining stage, a silent crowd, and a melody that would soon change everything. The day of the school talent show finally arrived. The big hall was decorated with colorful balloons and shiny ribbons. The stage lights glowed bright, and rows of chairs were filled with students, teachers, and parents. The air buzzed with excitement and laughter. Everyone was talking about who would win. Ethan sat quietly backstage, his small hands resting on his knees. His heart was beating fast, almost as if it wanted to run away one by one. The other students performed. A group of girls danced to a pop song. The crowd clapped and cheered. A boy performed magic tricks, making everyone laugh and shout in amazement. Then another student sang a funny song that made the audience roar with laughter. Ethan listened from behind the curtain, his stomach twisting tighter with every cheer. He could hear them shouting, clapping, and whistling for everyone else, but in his mind, he kept hearing the laughter from school. The laughter that had once hurt him so deeply. Mr. Collins came to him and knelt down beside him. "How are you feeling, Ethan?" he asked gently. Ethan whispered, "I'm scared. What if they laugh again?" Mr. Collins smiled softly. "They might laugh at first, but once you start playing, I promise they'll stop. They'll hear your heart." Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. His mother was sitting in the front row, her hands clasped together. She smiled at him and mouthed the words, "You can do it," when the host called his name. "Next, we have Ethan performing a piano piece." The crowd clapped politely, but a few giggles echoed from the back. Some students whispered, "Ethan? Really? He's performing?" Others snickered quietly. Ethan heard them and his face turned pale. He wanted to run away, but then he saw his mother's face. Her eyes were filled with love and pride, and that gave him courage. Slowly, he walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding, and for a moment, he couldn't see anyone clearly. The hall felt huge. The piano stood at the center like a giant waiting for him. He took a deep breath and sat down. His small legs barely touched the floor, and his hands trembled as he placed them on the keys. From the audience, someone whispered, "Can he even play?" Another voice laughed softly, "This will be funny." Ethan heard it. His heart hurt, and for a moment he wanted to stand up and leave, but then he remembered what Mr. Collins had told him. "Music has power, Ethan," and what his mother had said. Music speaks louder than words. He closed his eyes, took one more deep breath and pressed the first key. A soft, beautiful note filled the hall. The sound echoed gently through the air. and the laughter began to fade. He played the next few notes, slowly at first, then more confidently. Each sound blended into the next like a flowing river. The melody grew stronger. It was the same tune he had played at home so many times, the one that carried all his feelings. Every note told a story, the sadness of being left out, the warmth of his mother's love, and the hope that maybe one day people would see him for who he really was. The audience grew still. No one moved. The laughter that had once filled the room was replaced by silence, complete silence. Even the students who had laughed before were staring at him now, their faces changing from amusement to surprise. The music was gentle yet powerful, full of emotion. It didn't need words. It spoke directly to their hearts. Ethan's fingers moved gracefully over the keys. He forgot about the lights, the people, the whispers. Everything disappeared except for the music. He was no longer the boy everyone laughed at. He was a musician. Free and fearless, the notes sparkled in the air like magic, wrapping around everyone in the room. When he reached the final part of the song, the melody slowed down, soft and emotional. His fingers pressed the last few keys with care, and the sound lingered beautifully before fading into silence. For a few seconds, no one made a sound. The hall was frozen. The only thing that could be heard was the soft hum of the stage lights. Then someone in the audience began to clap. Slowly at first, then another joined and another, until the entire hall erupted in applause. The sound was thunderous. Parents stood up. Teachers wiped their eyes, and even the students who once made fun of him were clapping with tears in their eyes. The applause grew louder and louder, echoing through the hall like a wave. Ethan sat there, unsure what to do. His heart raced, his eyes filled with tears. He had never felt anything like it before. He turned to look at Mr. Collins, who was smiling proudly, and at his mother, who had tears streaming down her face but was clapping harder than anyone else. She mouthed the words, "You did it, Ethan." Ethan smiled shyly and gave a small bow. The audience cheered even louder, chanting his name. "Ethan, Ethan!" The same people who had once laughed at him were now standing for him, showing respect and admiration. As he walked off the stage, Mr. Collins hugged him tightly and whispered, "You see? I told you they would listen." Ethan nodded, still overwhelmed. "They stopped laughing," he said softly. Mr. Collins smiled. "Yes, because your music spoke for you, louder than any words ever could." Backstage, Ethan took a deep breath. It felt like he had just stepped out of a dream, but this time it was real. The boy who was once mocked for being different had made everyone silent, not with fear, but with awe that night as he went home with his mother. Ethan looked out the car window. The stars above sparkled brightly. "Just like the piano keys he loved so much, Mom," he said quietly. "They listened to me." Grace held his hand and whispered, "Yes, my love." The whole world finally listened. And as the car disappeared down the quiet road, Ethan leaned his head against the window, smiling softly for the first time in his life. He wasn't the boy people laughed at. He was the boy who made the whole world quiet, all with the touch of his music. The moment Ethan's fingers touched the piano keys, something magical happened. The laughter that had filled the hall only moments ago slowly faded into silence. It was as if time had stopped. Everyone in the audience turned their eyes toward the small boy sitting under the bright lights. The first note was soft, almost shy, but it carried a feeling so deep that it touched every heart in the room. Ethan's hands trembled at first, but as he played the next few notes, his fear began to melt away. The melody grew stronger, clearer, and filled with emotion. It was not just a song. It was his story. His pain, his loneliness, his dreams, and his courage were all inside those notes. The piano spoke for him in a language everyone could understand, even those who had laughed at him. As he played, the crowd leaned forward, no one wanting to miss a single sound. The teachers who had once doubted him looked at each other in disbelief. The students who used to whisper and giggle now sat frozen. Some had their mouths slightly open, unable to believe that this was the same boy they had ignored and teased. Ethan's eyes were closed. He didn't see the faces staring at him. He didn't hear the whispers or the applause that had faded away. He was lost in his own world, the world of music. The keys beneath his fingers felt alive. Every sound that came out of the piano carried his heart along with it. The song changed, becoming softer and slower. Like a gentle breeze after a storm, the sound floated through the hall like a whisper of hope. Every note seemed to speak words Ethan could never say out loud. "I'm not broken, I'm not less, I'm just different." And my heart can still shine, Grace. Sitting in the front row felt tears well up in her eyes. She had always known her son had something special inside him, but seeing him on that stage under the golden light, playing with such grace and feeling, it was more than she could handle. She clasped her hands together and whispered, "That's my boy." Her voice trembled with pride. Mr. Collins stood near the side of the stage, his eyes shining with tears he didn't bother to hide. He had seen hundreds of students perform, but nothing like this. Ethan wasn't following a sheet of music. He wasn't counting notes or beats. He was simply letting his heart guide his hands, and that made every note pure and alive. The melody rose higher, filling every corner of the room. It reached even the students sitting at the back, the same ones who had laughed the loudest before. Now they were quiet, truly quiet. Their smiles had faded, replaced by shame and wonder. One of the boys whispered to his friend, "He's really good." His voice was soft, almost guilty for the first time. Ethan wasn't the boy people felt sorry for. He wasn't the one with Down syndrome. He was something else. He was a musician, an artist, a soul shining brighter than anyone else on that stage. The music was so full of emotion that even the principal wiped her eyes, whispering to another teacher, "This is extraordinary." As Ethan reached the middle of his performance, his body moved with the rhythm. His fingers danced on the keys like water flowing through a stream. The sound grew powerful, each chord echoing deep within the walls of the hall. Some people closed their eyes just listening, letting the music wash over them. Every note carried a message. It said, "You laughed at me, but I forgive you," it said. "You ignored me, but I still want to share my heart with you." And it said, "This is who I am, and I'm proud of it." Grace looked around the hall. She could see the change in people's faces, eyes wide, tears forming, hearts softening for the first time. They saw her son the way she did, not as a boy with a condition, but as a child full of light, strength, and beauty. As the song neared its end, Ethan's fingers slowed down, the notes became softer, like a whisper fading into the night. The final few chords echoed like a heartbeat, strong, gentle, and full of love. Then he lifted his hands from the keys. The sound hung in the air for a long moment before fading completely. The hall was silent. No one clapped right away. They just sat there stunned, as if afraid to break the magic. Then one person started to clap, slowly at first. Then another joined, and another, until the entire hall was filled with thunderous applause. People stood up from their seats cheering. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Teachers clapped with both hands high, and students shouted his name, "Ethan! Ethan!" The sound of their cheers filled the air like a wave of warmth. Ethan looked up, his eyes wide in disbelief. He had never heard people cheer for him before. His heart swelled with joy. He stood up shyly and gave a small bow, his hands still shaking. Mr. Collins ran to the stage and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Ethan," he said softly. "You made them listen." Grace couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She rushed to him and hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered in his ear. Ethan smiled and said quietly, "They didn't laugh." "Mom." Everyone in the hall kept clapping, shouting, and cheering. The same children who once avoided him now looked at him with respect and admiration. Some of them even cried, realizing how wrong they had been. Ethan's music had done what words never could. It had changed their hearts. That night, when Ethan closed his eyes to sleep, he could still hear the sound of the applause echoing in his ears. He smiled softly and whispered, "They heard me." For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. The boy who once sat alone was now the boy who had touched hundreds of hearts with a melody. A boy who had made the whole world quiet just by being himself. When the last note of Ethan's song faded away, the hall stayed completely silent for a few seconds. It was the kind of silence that carried power, the kind that no one wanted to break. Everyone was frozen, still caught inside the beauty of what they had just heard. Then suddenly someone began to clap. It was soft at first, but soon another person joined. And then another. Within moments, the sound of applause filled the room like thunder. The audience stood up one by one until the entire hall was on its feet, cheering, shouting, and clapping for the little boy on stage. Ethan looked around, confused. He had expected laughter, maybe whispers or even pity. But this was something he had never imagined. The students who once made fun of him were standing, some of them even crying. The teachers who never thought much of him were wiping tears from their eyes. The same children who had called him strange were now clapping so loudly that the sound echoed through the entire hall. Mr. Collins stood at the edge of the stage, his hands shaking as he clapped. His heart was full of pride. He had believed in Ethan from the beginning, but even he hadn't expected something this powerful. He whispered to himself, "You did it, Ethan. You showed them who you really are." Grace sat in the front row, her face wet with tears. Her hands covered her mouth as she tried to stop herself from crying out loud. She had dreamed of this moment, the day when the world would finally see her son the way she did. But seeing it come true was even more emotional than she could ever imagine. She stood up and clapped harder than anyone else, whispering, "That's my boy, that's my brave boy." Ethan blinked, tears filling his own eyes. He didn't know what to do, so he smiled shyly and gave a small bow. The applause grew even louder, the hall filled with cheers. "Ethan! Ethan! Ethan!" His name echoed again and again, bouncing off the walls. Each shout sounded like music to him, like a song written just for his heart. Some of the kids who had laughed at him before now looked down in shame. They remembered the times they had whispered behind his back or laughed when he tried to talk. Now they couldn't even meet his eyes. A girl in the second row, who had once mocked him during class, wiped her eyes and said softly, "He's amazing," another boy whispered. "We were wrong about him." Ethan saw their faces and didn't feel angry. Instead, he felt something else, forgiveness. He didn't care about the past anymore. In that moment, he just felt proud, happy and free. He looked at the piano, still shining under the lights, and whispered softly, "Thank you." It had been his best friend when no one else understood him, and now it had helped him show the world his true self. Mr. Collins walked up onto the stage and put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You didn't just play music tonight," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You touched every single heart in this room." The audience clapped again, louder than before, and Ethan smiled, his eyes glowing under the stage lights. The principal took the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, what we witnessed just now was not only a performance, it was a miracle of courage and talent. Let's give one more round of applause for Ethan." The cheers grew even louder, the sound was deafening, but beautiful. After the show ended, people crowded around Ethan. Teachers came up to shake his hand. Parents he had never met before told him how amazing he was. One mother said, "You made me cry tonight," and another whispered, "Your music reminded me of hope." Even the kids who used to avoid him came forward shyly. One boy said, "Ethan, you're awesome," and another added, "I wish I could play like you." Ethan didn't know how to respond. He just smiled and said, "Thank you," again and again. His mother stood behind him, watching proudly. She could see how much he had grown in one evening. Her shy little boy had become a star. When they finally left the hall that night, the moon was shining high in the sky. Grace and Ethan walked hand in hand down the quiet street. The sound of applause still echoed in their ears. Ethan looked up at the stars and whispered, "Mom, did you see how they listened?" Grace smiled through her tears. "I saw, sweetheart. And I think they finally heard you." When they got home, Ethan went straight to the piano. He ran his fingers gently across the keys. As if thanking them, he played a few soft notes. Nothing fancy, just a gentle tune that filled the house with peace. Grace sat beside him and said, "You changed something tonight." "Ethan?" He looked at her curiously. "What do you mean, Mom?" She smiled and said, "You made people see the beauty in being different. You showed them that hearts speak louder than words." That night, Ethan went to bed feeling light for the first time in his life. He didn't worry about what others thought of him. He closed his eyes and replayed the night in his head. The bright lights, the applause, the smiling faces. He smiled softly, whispering, "I did it." At school the next day, something was different. When Ethan walked through the hallway, people didn't whisper anymore. They waved, smiled, and said hello. Some kids even asked him to sit with them at lunch. Mr. Collins greeted him proudly and said, "Good morning, superstar." Ethan laughed shyly. Still not used to the attention during recess, the same group of boys who had once laughed at him invited him to play soccer. "Come on, Ethan, we need you on our team," one of them said. Ethan hesitated, then smiled and joined them. They didn't laugh this time. They cheered when he kicked the ball. It was as if the world had turned upside down, but in the best way possible. The boy who was once the target of cruel jokes had become a symbol of inspiration. His music had done what no words ever could. It had opened hearts. That night, as Ethan sat once again by his piano, he felt something new inside him. It wasn't fear or sadness anymore. It was pride. He had found his place not by trying to be like everyone else, but by being exactly who he was. His heart, his kindness, and his music had spoken louder than anything else. And as he played softly under the moonlight, the same melody that had once filled the school hall now filled his home, a song of peace, forgiveness, and hope, a song that said without words, "The boy they laughed at became the boy they'll never forget." From that unforgettable night, everything in Ethan's life began to change. The next morning, when he walked into school, the world felt different. The hallways that once echoed with whispers and laughter behind his back were now filled with smiles and greetings. Kids who had never spoken to him before stopped to say, "Hey, Ethan, that song was amazing," or "You're so talented." Ethan, still shy, smiled and waved back. His heart felt light, and for the first time, he didn't feel invisible. Even his teachers treated him differently. Mrs. Parker, his homeroom teacher, knelt beside his desk one morning and said softly, "Ethan, I hope you know how proud we all are of you." He nodded and smiled. His eyes sparkling with joy, she added, "You taught everyone a lesson, and not from a book, but from your heart." Those words stayed with him all day. During lunch, he no longer sat alone by the window. The same group of boys who had once laughed at him now waved him over. "Come sit with us, Ethan," one said. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over and joined them. At first they didn't know what to say, but soon they were all laughing together. Not at him, but with him, Ethan told a small joke. And everyone laughed in a good way. That simple moment meant more to him than he could ever express. Word about his performance began to spread beyond the school. Parents told their friends. Teachers shared the story online. And soon people from nearby towns heard about the boy with Down syndrome who played the piano so beautifully that he made an entire audience cry. One day, the principal called Ethan and his mother into the office. Grace looked nervous, but the principal smiled warmly and said, "We've been invited to have Ethan perform at the city's community event next month. They want him to play his song there." Grace's eyes widened. "Oh, that's wonderful," she said. Ethan's mouth dropped open in surprise. "Me? Play in front of everyone again?" The principal nodded. "Yes, everyone wants to hear your music." At home, Ethan practiced every evening. The piano had always been his best friend, but now it felt like a bridge, a way to connect with people. His fingers danced across the keys with confidence, and each note carried warmth. His mother would sit nearby, sometimes just watching, sometimes closing her eyes and letting the sound fill her heart. Every time he played, she thought about how far he had come, from a lonely boy who faced laughter to a young musician who had earned the world's respect. On the day of the city event, the auditorium was even bigger than his school's hall. Rows and rows of seats stretched out before him, filled with people waiting quietly. When his name was announced, a few people in the front whispered, "That's the boy from the school story, the one who played the piano." Ethan took a deep breath and walked to the stage. The bright lights no longer scared him. This time he smiled as he sat down at the piano. When he began to play, the sound filled the massive hall like sunlight breaking through clouds. The audience listened in awe. Some closed their eyes. Others held hands with the person next to them. The music didn't just fill the air. It filled hearts. It spoke of courage, of kindness, and of a little boy who refused to give up when he finished. The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted longer than before. People shouted his name, tears streaming down their faces. His mother stood among them, her hands shaking as she clapped, proud beyond words. Reporters came up afterward to take pictures, asking Grace, "How did he learn to play so beautifully?" She smiled and said, "He didn't learn from a teacher. He learned from life, from love, and from believing in himself." In the weeks that followed, Ethan's story spread everywhere. Local newspapers wrote about him, calling him the boy who played from the heart. Videos of his performance appeared online. Gathering thousands of views and comments, people wrote things like, "He made me cry," "He's an angel," and "This is what true talent looks like." Ethan didn't understand all the attention. He just said, "I'm happy they liked my song." His mother hugged him and said, "It's more than that, Ethan. You reminded people that kindness and courage can change everything." But despite all the praise, Ethan stayed humble. He didn't care about fame or awards. He only cared about his piano every day after school. He would come home, wash his hands, and go straight to the piano. He would sit there for hours, lost in the world of music. The piano had become his voice, his way of saying everything his words couldn't express. Sometimes neighbors would gather outside the window just to listen. They would smile and whisper, "That sound. It feels like hope." And it was. Ethan's music had become a light in the small town. A light that reminded people to look beyond appearances, to see hearts instead of differences. One evening, as the sun set and the golden light filled the living room, Grace asked softly, "Ethan, do you know what your music has done?" He looked up and shook his head. She smiled and said, "You changed people before. They saw your condition, but now they see your heart." Ethan thought for a moment, then said, "Mom, I just wanted to make people smile." She laughed softly, wiping a tear from her eye. "And you did, sweetheart. You did more than that." As the days passed, Ethan continued to play, not for applause, but for peace. Whenever he pressed a key, he remembered the boy he used to be, sitting alone in class, ignored and misunderstood. He remembered the pain, the fear, and how the piano saved him. He also remembered the laughter that turned into silence, and the silence that turned into applause. Now, whenever he played, he smiled, because he knew his music was more than sound. It was proof that hearts could be stronger than judgment. His story wasn't about pity, it was about power. The quiet power of believing in yourself even when no one else does. Years later, people in the town still told the story of the boy who made everyone quiet. They said, "He didn't just play the piano, he played people's hearts." And every time someone passed by his house and heard the soft sound of the piano drifting through the window, they smiled, remembering that night when a little boy taught the world that kindness, courage, and music could heal anything. Ethan never forgot that feeling, the moment when his music made the world listen. And even as he grew older, he continued to play, spreading peace wherever his melody reached, because in his heart, he knew the truth. He wasn't born to be laughed at. He was born to make the world quiet, so it could finally hear the beauty of a pure and gentle soul.